Tony, whenever you're ready. Good morning. My name is Jim Durkin. I'm the House Republican leader, 82nd District, Western Springs, Illinois. Today I'm here to discuss Governor Pritzker's continuing lack of respect for and also continuing attack on our police officers, those currently on the force and those who have served, and the victims of crime in this state. I'm joined today by my two guests, Robert Mazzera, a former Chicago police officer who, after just a few weeks on patrol, was shot and nearly killed by a man named Kensley Hawkins. Hawkins would go on to be convicted not just of the attempt murder of Mazzera, but also of a murder of a 65-year-old man, which was conducted a week before that shooting. He was sentenced to 95 years in the Illinois Department of Corrections for both these crimes. J.B. Pritzker commuted Hawkins' sentence for the murder and the attempt murder of Officer Mazzera in 2021. At this point, I'd like to have Robert Mazzera come up to the podium and speak of his story.
Hello, my name is Robert Mazzera. On November 14, 1980, I was a 9-month Chicago police officer working with my partner in the area of 79th and Morgan on an armed robbery mission. There had been a number of armed robberies that occurred around 2 a.m. as local bars and lounges were closing. At approximately 2 a.m., we observed two males in the north alley of 79th Street behind a building watching people leaving the lounge. As we drove up on them to investigate, they both ran in different directions. I exited the squad car and chased one of the men, now known as Kensley Hawkins, ultimately ending up at the residence at 7847 South Carpenter. Mr. Hawkins had broken out the glass of the screen door of the porch and was lying down in the porch area of the home. Observing this, I instructed Mr. Hawkins to stand and come out of the porch. Mr. Hawkins stood up and he started to come out repeating, "Please don't shoot me, please don't shoot me." I go, "I'm not going to shoot you, just come out." As he bent over to go through the broken window because the door was obviously locked, he came up with a sawed-off shotgun, which he shot me with, and then turned it on my partner who was walking up beside me and tried to shoot him also. I sustained shotgun blasts to my neck, arm, shoulder, chest. I still have all the pellets in me today. In the ensuing moments, Mr. Hawkins broke into the house, confronted the owner with the sawed-off shotgun, at which time he was shot twice by the owner. Mr. Hawkins was subsequently found under a couch in the house by responding CPD units and taken into custody. Further investigation revealed that the shotgun used by Mr. Hawkins was the property of a man by the name of Norflit Hollowell, who was brutally murdered in his apartment approximately 1 week before. Ultimately, Mr. Hawkins was convicted of this murder, for which he received 60 years. He was also convicted of the attempt murder of 2 police officers, myself and my partner, Peter Wood. He also armed robbery and home invasion, which he received 35 years for. Mr. Hawkins would have been eligible for parole around 2027. On April 22nd, 2021, I was informed by email that Mr. Hawkins had been released from prison with no reason given. Representative Durkin reached out to me and related that Mr. Hawkins had his sentence commuted by Governor Pritzker, and this was done at the request of the law firm of Jenner & Block. Also, Jenner & Block sent out a news release about the successful release of Mr. Hawkins, portraying him as a simple, uninformed getaway driver. No mention of trying to murder 2 police officers. As a former police officer, I would like to think that the state and local government would have the back of the thousands of men and women who put on a uniform every day and put their life on the line for the people of Illinois. Sadly, that's not the case. The governor's office called the law offices at Jenner & Block to tell him that Mr. Hawkins was going to be released. The governor didn't call me. He didn't ask me what I thought. I didn't care. So that's my dealing with Governor Pritzker and his release of people that obviously still should be in jail. Thank you.
Thank you, Bob. Next, we'd like to hear from Chicago FOP President John Catanzara.
Thanks, Leader. As you just heard, a story that should never be uttered in public. It just shouldn't happen, but yet it did. As the FOP President in Chicago, I've been firsthand seat, front row for many of these hearings on police officer shooters and murderers. And the makeup of the current parole board is getting worse, not better. They let out 3 cop murderers in the last 2 years since I've been president, with another one literally by one vote kept in twice now, with another hearing scheduled later this year. And there's another one coming up for Clifford Knights, who murdered Officer Rosado and Sergeant Severin in Cabrini Green almost a half a century ago. And he was the shooter. And yet here he is again, up for parole one more time, with his partner in crime released last year. And just to make matters even worse, July 11th, there will be a clemency hearing petition for the murderer of Officer Brian Strauss, my classmate in the academy. These need to stop. If an officer cannot get justice and their family cannot get justice, what does the average citizen think is going to happen to the people and monsters that murder their loved ones? You know, I see all the time executive officers across this country and even in the White House state very unequivocally ahead of time that if something comes on their desk, they will not sign it. They take a stance right from the beginning. I challenge Governor Pritzker to do that with Hector Delgado's clemency petition right now and say whether the parole board recommends it or not, he will confirm not signing that clemency petition and giving this murderer an early release. Understand, we are now very clear in what should happen to cop murderers. They should spend life in prison without parole. Far too often, we try and rewrite history for sentences that were clearly defined to do just that, where these offenders were meant to die in prison. And now we try and unwind the clock and try and show some leniency, not we, them, and give them the benefit of the doubt. That was never the way it's supposed to be then. It's not the way it's supposed to be now, or the sentence wouldn't be automatic life without parole. So why are we even entertaining letting cop killers out of prison, other than for political expediency and votes and placating to the mob? This society and how dangerous and violent it has become, this is in part and parcel of why. These offenders do not believe there is any lasting consequences for their actions. And every time one of these cop shooters and killers get out of prison, it only reinforces that mindset, and it needs to stop. How on God's green earth can you name a convicted murderer to the parole board to decide whether somebody should be released or not from prison? It needs to stop. It should be a central component in what people decide when they go to the ballot box. Early voting started yesterday, but again, June 28th, you have a chance to stop this nonsense once and for all and remake up the parole board in a more logical demographic is all I can put it. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Bob, and thank you, John. I've said over the past year that Governor Pritzker has created a consequence-free state of Illinois for criminals, cold-blooded murderers, and street gangs. Just listening to the testimony today, it's never more evident. Governor Pritzker revealed his true hand towards police all throughout the state by signing the Safety Act, otherwise known as the Defund Police Act, into law. He also, time and time again, has shown a disregard for the victims of violent crime in our state, releasing cold-blooded killers back on our streets. His disregard for the pain and tragedy victims have endured is astonishing. We just heard from Bob Mazzara of what he's had to go through. No administration has treated criminals convicted of murdering police officers and attempt murder of a police officer with the kid gloves that J.B. Pritzker has. His actions show that he has no respect for law enforcement, and that's part of a very disturbing narrative in which we become accustomed to in Illinois. His hand-picked prisoner review board has released notorious criminals back into society, including cop killers like Johnny Veal, cold-blooded murderers and rapists like Paul Bryant, the Lincoln Park rapist, and child killers like Ray Larson. They are cold-blooded killers. And the families of those victims objected to the release of these men from the Department of Corrections. Beyond granting parole, the Prisoner Review Board serves another important function, making recommendations to the governor about clemency action. This would include recommendations about people like Kensley Hawken, Bob Mazira's attempted murderer. Question I have is, when will this ever end? In January, I introduced House Bill 5126, a package of victim-focused reforms to the Prisoner Review Board. Currently, recommendations on clemency for the PRB to the governor are kept secret, as they did with Kensley Hawken. But among the provisions of my legislation is a requirement that clemency recommendations from the board to the governor would be made available to the public and subject to the Freedom of Information Act. The governor likes to talk about transparency. This is a time for him to step up and follow through. My legislation would also increase transparency, ensuring that a number of board members would have law enforcement background and require a higher threshold vote for individuals convicted of first-degree murder. It would also require the governor to grant or deny the decisions of the Prisoner Review Board, or to revoke their parole or aftercare release in cases of first-degree murder. These provisions would also be subject to the Freedom of Information Act. The governor, the champion of transparency, he should follow through. He doesn't need the law to do this. He can do this voluntarily. But as expected, Speaker Welch, no friend of law enforcement, would not allow this legislation to receive a hearing. We need transparency. We need accountability. We need this legislation now more than ever to rein in a thoughtless prisoner review board, but also to rein in a governor who prioritizes criminals over police. With that, I'll open it up to questions. Tony?
Leader Durkin, if things are this bad now, what happens on January 1st when the Safety Act is more fully implemented?
Look, I'm just going to say this, and I've been talking to a number of people, but the Safety Act, and particularly the no cash bail, is a ticking time bomb waiting to explode upon innocent people throughout the state of Illinois, Chicago and the suburbs, and also through downstate Illinois. The Democrats created one of the most catastrophic pieces of legislation ever to become law of Illinois. It completely goes against the constitutional requirement that our ultimate responsibility is to keep our public safe. So there's a lot of things in here, but the fact is that when we have a no cash bail system, which has been a disaster in other jurisdictions, what the governor is saying is that we're going to rely upon the honor system. We are going to rely upon the honor system with street gangs, with cartels, drug runners, drug traffickers, and hardened criminals. John, is there anything you'd like to add to that?
You know,
Your men are going to be dealing with it.
we see it time and time again. You know, there's still even the answer, the shooter for Officer Fernanda. Oh my God, I'm blanking. Fernanda got shot by somebody who had a gun conviction but yet had a FOID card. I mean, these laws were designed to not allow that to happen, but yet they happen all the time. And making it easier for criminals to get out and just do whatever they want to do. I mean, you're telling somebody who is going to get arrested for a gun charge, brought up in front of a judge, and then be told, okay, we're going to give you an I bond and go back out. That person's going to be out on the street in 12 hours with another gun in their hand, no doubt about it, doing whatever they want to do. And it just needs to stop.
So, Tony, just on one other aspect of this, there is a provision in here which for the first time is going to allow a defendant to be able to compel a victim of crime to appear at a detention hearing starting January 1st. This is a defendant is going to be able to drag a victim of crime for what purpose at a detention hearing on a violent crime with no restriction, no limitation on age or the crime. This could be the little girl who was assaulted by the neighbor or the person down the street or by the stranger. This is going to be the wife or the girlfriend who is beaten with an inch of her life by the husband or the boyfriend, who will say that I want this person to be brought into court, and I'm going to petition the court to compel their testimony. This is what the Democrats and J.B. Pritzker have done. That is called intimidation. You will never have another prosecution of that nature again, based on what the governor has put into law and how they treat victims of crime, particularly in these most serious cases. We have a responsibility to protect victims, not to feed them to the savages, is what J.B. Pritzker and the Democrats have done under this legislation. You also have another provision in the law which states that if a defendant is in custody, let's say for a first-degree murder case, and is not taken to trial within 90 days, that person must be released from custody. Never mind the danger that that person poses to the community or to the victims or the witnesses who are willing to stand up and testify against this person, but knowing that this murderer has been released from custody based on a state law. Is this going to give them any willingness and any comfort to do what they should be doing, and that's to work with the prosecution to bring justice to that family or that neighborhood?
Could you explain that again? Do I understand that you're saying that someone murders someone?
And if they're held on no bond,
How can there be no bond?
well, you can be you do have certain cases that are subject to a detention hearing, but that's only if the state seeks to have a detention hearing, and that's for those are for non-probational offenses, but also forcible felonies. First-degree murders are forcible felonies; they're non-probationable. Person gets picked up; it could be right now, or it could be after the first of the year. But if the case is not tried within 90 days, that person must be released from custody. And again, they'll be given a piece of paper, and we're going to go back and say that we're going to rely upon the honor system, that they're going to show up in court and they're going to behave while they're out, knowing full well that there is victims who are willing to testify and witnesses in a very difficult situation. We're going to be subject to intimidation, retaliation, which often happens in Chicago, particularly when it comes to street gangs. That's the law of Illinois.
Mr. Leader, we have some stations downstate that are not as familiar with the cases up here.
Yeah.
The reporter's asking, can we please have the name of the person you're speaking about that was released again?
Sure.
I'd like to make sure I answer that.
I'm going to ask Bob, you want to come up here and talk about Mr. Hawkins again? You talk, what you know?
Please. Again, we have some stations downstate that are
Could you
not
spell your name?
familiar with the case.
My name is Robert, last name Mizera, M-I-Z-E-R-A. I was shot by Kensley Hawkins with a sawed-off shotgun November 14th, 1980. The shotgun he used to shoot me was taken from a guy that was brutally murdered about a week before by Mr. Hawkins. He was convicted of that murder, then convicted of attempt murder of myself and my partner, Peter Wood, for attempt murder, and then there was a home invasion, an armed robbery he was in, and some other charges.
May I have Mr. Hawkins' first name, please?
Kensley, K-E-N-S-L-E-Y.
Anything else you'd like to add to?
I have to agree with Leader Durkin and John Canizero that if there's some changes are made, the people of Illinois are in serious trouble, not to mention the people that are protecting them. Something needs to change. Thank you.
I just one last comment, and this is about, it was raised that the law firm representing Mr. Hawkins received a phone call from the governor's office stating that we're going to commute the sentence of your client, and he's going to be released, and he's going home. Bob Mizera never got a phone call. No one from the governor's office even asked for his advice. He got a very benign, cold email statement from the Department of Corrections stating that Kensley Hawkins has been released from custody. It's called priorities. Thank you. Tony, are we done? All right. Thanks, Bob.